Hey friends, it's Ann Eileen Thompson. Welcome to the Faith Driven Leader Podcast. You know, our goal here on the Faith Driven Leader Podcast is to equip and embolden listeners like you to bring their faith into their work and to build a career and a life that's built on deep trust in our good Father God. We get inspired by incredible stories from amazing guests who are letting their faith drive their leadership in their lives and their families and their ministries and in the marketplace. Today, I'm so excited to welcome my good friend, Chuck Mingo. Chuck is a husband. He's a dad of 3. He's an amazingly gifted teaching pastor at Crossroads Church here in Cincinnati. And he's also the founder and CEO of LivingUNDIVIDED. And Living Undivided is a program that takes participants through a journey of life-changing moments, really all centered around racial healing. It's an incredible program. I hope that you'll look it up. Chuck's going to talk a little bit more about it today. I've known Chuck for years. And I've always been so impacted by his leadership, his humility and authenticity, his ability to empathize, and his incredible teaching gift. So I'm so excited for you to hear from Chuck today. He's going to share a bit about what he's learning about leading in this particular cultural moment. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. We'll kind of go ahead and get started. The goal of the Faith Driven Podcast, Chuck, is to equip and embolden our listeners with this whole idea of how do I actually walk out my faith throughout my career? You have had a pretty fascinating career, and you've been in positions of leadership for quite some time. So let's start with leadership and just give us an overview. Where does faith play a role for you in your leadership?
Well, first of all, I'm just really glad to have this conversation with you, Ann. And I think it's a really interesting question to say, where does faith play in? In some ways, my answer is, in my lived experience, there's not a place where it doesn't play in to my leadership. And I don't say that because I'm like some holy person. I'm not. I say that because, my earliest experiences in life really were faith-driven experiences. So, I grew up in a family of faith with a mom and a dad who really brought faith into our household and our family. You might know this about me. I went to a small family church in Philadelphia where I grew up. And so my earliest examples of leadership were, in fact, faith-driven leaders, pastors, and, people in my family. So I think for me, and I appreciate this about my upbringing, there's not really ever been a separation of the secular from the sacred, if you will, in terms of how I view many things in life, leadership for sure being one of them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And this is actually a question I get a lot from other people too, who are, especially I've noticed younger leaders or folks kind of coming out of school who they want to bring their faith into their career, but then they get stuck in this place of like, well, does that mean I have to be in ministry?
Right.
And you have had a very interesting journey of corporate to ministry to now what you're doing with Undivided, which I want to make sure we talk about, because I want to hear more about that story and how faith has played a role in it. But I'm curious, when you think about it, it's a very real concept for me too, this idea that it doesn't really matter actually which job you're in. You can bring your faith to all of it. But I'm curious for you, what are some of the common threads? Like when you think about your time at P&G and your time as a teaching pastor and your time now at Undivided, are there some common threads that you think about with your faith that just permeate across all of those?
Definitely. And I think, to your point, even for people who are listening who may not have, a religious faith, or maybe their faith is in a different context, maybe outside of Christian faith, I do see common threads. So one of the things that I think about is we all have a set of values.
Yeah.
And that set of values, I think, is the way I would describe it is the things we value, we believe as we're living into them, we're living into the fullness of who we are. Like there's a better version of me as I live into my values. And so one of the through lines that I've seen, regardless of whether it's corporate, whether it's in a church, nonprofit, the leaders that I most admire are leaders who lived with a core set of values and really let that drive their life. And so I would say that's one of the through lines I would absolutely see. I think the other one is trust. We're using this word faith, and faith can be a churchy word. faith means trust. And, I mean, you're a great example of this. There's a lot of trust that had to be put into the career that you've had, right? To the things that
Right.
you started, to the
Yeah.
things that you've unrolled and then had to start again. And so I would say that's another through line I see is just the need for trust to be built at every level in your career. And I think that, for me, faith is a way to put that trust into action. And
Yeah.
so that's another through line that I've seen. And then one other one is valuing people. I
Mm.
mean, one of the things that is common, if you look at any of the faiths that exist in religion, they all have a sense in which the dignity of people is
Mm.
put at a priority. Now, we don't
Yeah.
always live that out, right? I mean, there's a lot of examples and stories of how we got that wrong. But there's absolutely been situations where all of those faiths, if you look at the core text, there's a dignity of the human being
Yeah.
that runs through all of them. And so those are some of the through lines that I would say apply whether you're a physician, a lawyer, starting a nonprofit, running a startup. That's
Yeah.
true in all those places.
That's so good. I'm thinking even more about that valuing people one when it comes to undivided. And I want to
Mm-hmm.
get to that, but I want to go back to the trust one, because this
Mm-hmm.
is a really interesting, this is kind of a hot button for me and an important point. Like if I look in scripture and I look at the definition of faith and I
Mm-hmm.
go into like Hebrews, right? And I see that faith is kind of believing in what we can't see
Right.
and trusting essentially in things that haven't really actually been proven. Now you're going to know this better than me, so you might catch me on this, but I've done a little digging on that
Uh-huh.
and looking back at the original language, and there's some translations that use the word evidence,
Mm-hmm.
and that this idea that we trust because there actually is evidence
Yes.
in our own lives. Like we can look back on
Yes.
our lives and say, here are times when clearly God intervened.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that builds my trust and builds my faith.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I mean, what would you add to that in terms of the definition of trust and the interplay with faith?
Yeah, no, it's really good. I think you're right. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. This dates me, but it's true. I grew up in a church that used the King James Version because that was the version that we had, right? So
Yeah.
Hebrews 11, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not
Evidence.
seen. That's how I remember that
Yes.
verse, right? And I think you're right though that there is evidence, right? I mean,
Yeah.
our faith isn't a blind faith, and now sometimes faith has to be blind. I mean, at some point there was. I mean, I'll use a very obvious example. I mean, I think about Steve Jobs. Like at some point there wasn't a smartphone. There had
Right.
to be a belief that a smartphone could happen and be. But even that was based on evidence of technologies that built up to become a smartphone. So I think you're absolutely right that there is
Yeah.
a sense in which there is evidence. And part of that is one of the things that I am learning as a leader is one of the most undervalued skills of a leader is the skill of reflection.
Hmm. Say more about
Great,
that.
yeah, great leaders reflect. They sometimes do that in a diary. They sometimes do that in a journal. Sometimes they do that as they take long walks. Sometimes they do that in community with other people. But great leaders have a practice of reflection. I often put it this way when I'm talking to groups. People say experience is the best teacher. And I would say no. You can actually have the same experience over and over again and not learn from it.
Yes. Wow. That's such a good point. That's such a
Reflected
good point.
experience is the best teacher. When I have an experience and I reflect on it to say, man, I want more of this in my life. Okay, what happened? Or I don't want any more of this in my life. What went wrong? Or in my business or in my relationships? That's the
Mm.
power that you get with reflection. And so, what reflection gives you as a leader is that's where you start to see the evidence of God's hand at work
Mm.
in your
That's
life.
so that's so beautiful,
Yeah.
Chuck. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that phrase. That's going to be a new one. I'm going to reuse that.
Mm-hmm,
This idea
mm-hmm.
that reflective experience
Is
is,
the best
I
teacher.
mean,
Yes.
is the
You got to
best
reflect
teacher.
on it to
That's
get the fruit
just
out of it.
for
Mm-hmm.
sure, for sure. So I'm curious, make it practical for us.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
idea of how faith comes to life for you as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's even an example of something that happened recently where,
Sure. Yeah.
and kind of what you were saying, the other thing I was thinking, it feels like our faith is built on backwards. Like
Yes.
we can look back and see evidence, and that gives
Mm-hmm.
us confidence in what we can't yet see. And I can think of lots of day-to-day examples where that plays out in leadership, but I'm curious for you, like, give us a real example of where that played out, where your faith is what allowed you to make a particular decision or respond a particular way.
Yeah. I'll pick one that's actually maybe, I want to think about this. I want to think about a good meaty example. There's a lot of them. Here's one. So I am authoring and have finished my first book, which is very exciting.
That's amazing. I'm working on a book too. We're gonna have to
compare. Are you? Yeah. We will. So the book is coming out in January, but I'll share with you a little bit of the journey of writing the book and where faith really played a role. So we had the book done. It was at the publisher. It was on Amazon, and it was ready to launch January of this year. And late in the game, I got feedback from some people that I trust.
Yeah.
Some people that, quite frankly, if I reflect on it, I probably knew they would have some difficult feedback from me, and there was a little bit of reluctance to engage it. But when I got the feedback, it was so significant that I had a choice to make.
Wow.
And the choice was, okay, this book is literally being printed. Like, it wasn't fully printed, but it was being printed. And we had timeline and budgets and all that was based on that book coming out this January.
Right. Yeah.
And I really wrestled with, what do I do in this situation? And I'll be honest, I did some kicking and some screaming at first, and I was mad at first and all the things. And then eventually I realized, and my wife, thank God, helped me to realize that I'd be foolish to not let this feedback, even the timing in which it was being given, impact the book. And so for me, here's what faith looked like super practically. It looked like going to the publisher, knowing that there would be a financial consequence for delaying the book, doing that, bearing that financial consequence, because I believed that I needed to respond to this feedback.
Yeah.
Then it meant going to my co-author, because I'm not the only author on this book. And I didn't do this perfectly. I learned some things about how I can better communicate with him, but telling him, hey, I know this is going to be costly in terms of time. We had already booked all of our time for this book to happen. We're going to have to do a lot more work. But going to him and having that awkward and not perfect conversation, him graciously understanding and us doing this together. The only reasons that I did that is because faith was driving me to do that. And I felt that God was giving me an opportunity to trust him in something difficult, in something hard. And, I don't know that means that when the book comes out, it's going to be a New York Times bestseller. I don't know that, but here's what I do know. I know that what is now at the publisher is a better book.
It's better. Yeah.
It's better. I know that. And maybe it was just for that reason that I had to trust. But that's a very practical thing where, when money's on the line, when relationships are on the line, like, that's where faith is faith, right?
Totally.
Super practical. We all had those moments.
That's such a great example. And it's interesting because it's almost like you're laying your baby on the altar.
Oh, totally.
You got the choice. Am I going to potentially kill it? Because at that stage, when you're making that decision, you don't really know what the output's going to be. Like, you don't know, am I going to lose my publishing deal? Am I going to, is my co-author going to get really frustrated and not want to partner with me? And then we have a big divide and cost us even more time. Like, so I love that it's a great example of even the discernment necessary to say, wait a second, the Lord has sent these people into my life.
Yes.
I had a hunch earlier I should have asked. And I'm going to eat the humble pie and say, I asked for the feedback and now I got some changes. Wow. What a great example. I love that example. That's so good. So good. Okay. I want to talk about, you and I share this background, starting our careers at Procter & Gamble. And I left P&G. I left P&G after 12 years to go do work for a small company and do part-time ministry. So I had like one foot in ministry and one foot in business, and it was a big pay cut and all this kind of stuff. And I remember at the time thinking, plenty of people think I'm crazy for leaving Procter to go do
Mm-hmm.
something else. And I was thinking, I've never heard this story from Chuck. I want to hear the story about the transition, and then now you've
Mm-hmm.
made another transition.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
tell us about how faith plays a role in this is the most common question I get from people. I want to make a
Mm-hmm.
career transition. How do I listen to the Lord, but also
Mm-hmm.
balance what's best for my career or what I want, things like that. And you've made a couple of these transitions. Tell us about those and what role faith played in them.
I have. Well, first, since you're in the club, I guess we do find out there is life after Proctor, right? Because that's
There
one of the
sure
things
is.
you wonder. It's life after Proctor. I love P&G and love my
Me
time there.
too.
But yes, that's a company that when you, particularly in the times we were there, it just wasn't common for people to step away and leave. And
Yeah.
so um, I'll make a long story somewhat shorter to get to your question around what role faith played. And I think to do that though, I do need to give you a little bit of background on
Please.
my journey to P&G. So I think there's a God story in terms of how I even got to Procter and Gamble. And I don't know if I've ever shared this story with you. So when I
Uh-uh.
was 18 years old, I was graduating from high school, and the spring before graduation, I got introduced to the Inroads program. Inroads is a program that was started actually by a Catholic priest in the 1960s to
Okay.
create an opportunity for kids of color to intern at Fortune 500 companies. And so that's how I even got to P&G. But even that story is unique. So the way it works in Inroads is you get accepted into the program. They teach you interviewing skills, resume prep, et cetera, professional skills. And then you get a chance to interview with companies. And if those companies accept you, then you're an official Inroads intern. You get an internship. Well, I had three companies: Procter and Gamble, Conrail, which is no longer in business, and a regional gas company in the Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area where I grew up.
Okay.
And so I got offers from all three of those companies, and it's decision day. So you get a counselor basically assigned to you at Inroads. And I get on the call with them, and he asks me, "So what's your decision?" And I'm like, "I'm going to go with Conrail because it's a company that I can get to. I don't have a car, and I want to be able to catch public
Mm.
transportation." And he's like, "Really? You don't want to go in P&G? Because you have to take a test to go to P&G." He's like, "You passed the test. Like you,
Not
not
everybody
everybody takes that
passes
test.
the
Pass
test.
that test. Like you should think about this." And I'm like, "Well, no, but I can't get there." Well, he puts me on hold, and he goes and gets one of his other counselor counterparts. She gets on the phone. Her name is Dory Ray. And Dory dated my older brother, 13 years older than me. So Dory has known me since I was a baby.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so Dory gets on this conference call then, because we didn't have Zoom. And she's like, hey, Chuck, it's Dory. And I'm like, "Oh, hey, Dory, how are you?" She's like, "I am good, baby. Now let me tell you what you're gonna do. You're gonna work at Procter and Gamble, and you're gonna figure out how to get there." So literally, I'm 18 years old, and if Dory doesn't intervene in that moment,
Right.
I don't get to I don't get to Cincinnati. I mean, God he could have brought me to Cincinnati however he was, but he was using that. And
Totally.
so it's interesting for me to think about that story as it relates to then leaving P&G, where
Yeah.
once again, it was kind of the same thing of, okay, there's this opportunity, but it's unknown to me. I don't know that this is going to work, but I know that God was calling me after after 9 years at P&G to step away and become a pastor at Crossroads.
Mm.
And I think about that in this way. I think faith played into it in a couple ways. Number one was I had to get clear about who God had wired me to be.
Mm.
And as I got clearer about that,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that it was about teaching people, and I knew that it was about
Mm.
encouraging people in their faith. I knew that. And I was doing that within P&G. Not I wasn't proselytizing people, but I was doing that, like I
Right.
was getting clearer around that. Second thing is I had to faith all I think faith is always a trade-off in
Mm.
this sense. We all have faith in something right now. We're trusting something right
Yep.
now to bring
Yep.
us life, purpose, joy, identity, or whatever.
Yep.
Faith oftentimes is God inviting you to trade that trust for trust in Him. And that was what it was for me. I mean, it meant a lot to be the first in my family to work at a Fortune 500 company. It meant a
Yeah.
lot to have the salary that I had, and thinking about the financial prospects that come with that. And I wanted that. I really
Yeah.
wanted that. One of my jokes was I used to wanted to be on the cover of Black Enterprise magazine. Like that's where I wanted. And so for me, the trade off was you can have that, and I could. I mean, I feel like God was saying, like you can have
Right.
that, I'm offering you something different. And the different was more of who I have wired you to be. And faith was me saying, I'm going to choose that.
Yeah.
And, and let me be real with your listeners. I'm at the stage now, maybe you're there too, where all the people who were my peers at P&G, they're like VPs now, and
Yeah.
they're doing really well financially.
CEOs and stuff. I'm like,
So
whoa,
I'm
what's
just
going
saying,
on?
like, right. I'm not trying, again, I don't want to paint a picture that like it's all roses, right? And I will tell you this. I know that who I am today, I am living more fully into who God wired me to uniquely be in this world. And I have the gift of being able to do work in my life that puts me in those places. And that is something that you can't put a price tag on.
Yeah.
And so faith has been a continual part of this journey. It continues to be a part of the journey of my career, as you said, as I made the transition from Crossroads full-time campus pastoring to now leading a nonprofit, Undivided. So yes,
Yeah.
faith is a big part of those transitions. And I
Yeah.
think, again, for listeners, I would say, to make it practical, what I'm learning about God is God is way more interested in you living into who he called you to be than any place where that puts you. Like you can do that in a bunch of different contexts.
Yes,
The clues that you
totally.
should be listening for are the clues around, hey, does this help me live more fully into who God made me to be? That's what I would
Yeah.
encourage people to do.
I love that. I was also thinking about, I'm a big fan of Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great,
Yes. Oh yeah.
and
Love that book. Mm-hmm.
he's got this phrase of the good is the enemy of the great.
Mm-hmm.
And your story of transition of leaving Procter reminds me a lot of my own. And I was wrestling a little bit with God. I felt like God was telling me it's time to go and do something different. And I was
Mm-hmm.
wrestling with that quite a bit. And one night I had a very vivid dream. And in the dream, I'm kind of a little sheep wandering through a desert. I mean, he was pretty literal with me. And there's a shepherd, and I figured out that was Jesus. And he's got a little a little rod with him. And I look to the right, and there's this glorious bounty of good things, fruits and vegetables and all my favorite flowers, and this beautiful thing that has been created just for me. And I look to the left, and there's like a hill, and I can't see over it. And
Mm-hmm.
the sheep look to the right and look up at the shepherd and go, let's go this way. And he says, we're going that way, because that's good, but you can't see what's over the hill. I can.
Wow.
And that's great. We're going this way. And so similar. Like I don't regret it for a sec. I don't regret any of my time at Procter. I learned so much.
Exactly.
The frameworks I learned and the principles I learned and the leadership lessons I learned and all of that are absolutely invaluable. The people I met, but how often in our careers is the good the enemy of the great when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to what the Lord wants to do with us?
Yeah.
Your story just
Yeah.
reminds me of that.
Oh, that's so good.
So
That's
good.
so good.
So good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I want to talk about Undivided. I have been
Yes.
a
Yes.
fan since this effort, really. What I've most loved is watching you come alive as this vision became clearer and clearer. Tell us a little, give us the
Mm-hmm.
overview of Undivided. And then
Yeah.
I've got a
Yeah.
bunch of questions
Awesome.
about
Yep.
that. But give us an overview,
Well,
and how'd you get where, like, are you full time in Undivided these days? What does your job look like? Give us some
yeah.
overview
Yeah.
stuff.
Absolutely. So, the elevator speech is Undivided is a movement for racial healing, solidarity, and justice. And what we primarily do is in churches and in other organizations, help people come alive to the ways that they can engage in racial healing and justice in their context. In corporate space, that would be obviously mostly in their organizations.
Yeah.
But from church perspective, it's the church, and then it's also the community. And Undivided really came through being wholly disturbed, and I mean that in both ways, like completely disturbed, and then also a holy disturbance around the state of race in our country. So going back to 2014, this would have been like right after Ferguson kind of happened.
Yeah.
And for those who remember, there was an officer who shot African American male in Ferguson, and really a lot of people gathered and converged on Ferguson and kind of,
Yeah.
protest that. And the week after that, or a couple of weeks after that, I met my now co-founder, Troy Jackson, who was leading an organization in Cincinnati called the Amos Project. And the Amos Project was a collection of congregations, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, actually, that were doing racial and economic justice work in Cincinnati. So I meet with Troy, and he starts asking me all these questions. And Troy's a white guy. Troy is, at that time, late 40s white guy, asking me all these questions as a black man about how do I feel about race in America. And we joke about it now because I'm like, I don't know this guy. Like you're going in and asking me all these questions. I don't know if I want to be honest with you. But at some point, he revealed enough of his heart that it helped me reveal enough of my heart. And I just lamented to him about where we were. And he invited me into the work of Amos. And then from that point, which would have been kind of fall-ish, winter of 2014, fast forward to the spring of 2015, Crossroads, as you know, was doing the Brave Journey. So our church did a 6-week series based on the story of Jesus inviting Peter to get out of the boat and walk on the water. And the question was, what's that brave step in your life where Jesus is inviting you to get out of the boat and walk on the water? And that's where the calling really became clear to me, that for me, it was to be about racial healing, solidarity, and justice, and to create something that would enable the church to go from the background on that issue to the forefront on that issue. And that's really what we've been doing ever since. So an incredible team came around that. Over the next 9 months, we created a 6-week experience. It's now a 7-week experience that helps people understand history and helps them understand what does the Bible have to say about these things. And we talk about empathy and help people experience the stories of others, and then collectively begin to get a vision for, okay, how can we be the hands and feet of the God who loves and cares about justice in our local community? And so in 2016, that looked like in Cincinnati, 250 undivided alumni being a part of a larger effort at Amos to knock on doors and make phone calls for the passage of Issue 44, or the Preschool Promise campaign, passed by a historic margin. And today, and there are, I think, 6,000 kids in our city who have access to quality preschool who wouldn't have had it had it not been for that. And so what we're doing now is we're replicating that. So in 2020, I made another leap, to your point. Love Crossroads, still a teaching pastor at Crossroads, was comfortable in my role at Crossroads. But just like everybody else, as we went through the racial reckoning of 2020, and particularly when I watched what happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis, I knew for me, it was time to take what we had been doing at Crossroads and, God willing, expand it to other places across the country. And so that's what I'm doing now. So I am full-time at Undivided, leading that work. It's funny you use the term CEO. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit. I never envisioned being the CEO of a nonprofit. I'm growing a lot in my leadership as CEO of a nonprofit, which basically means you're a fundraiser and an ambassador. And so I'm doing a lot of that, but learning a ton about the ways in which followers of Jesus and people who care about these issues can really make a difference. And it is hard too. I mean, I know this is one of the questions you wanted to ask, and I'll just go there. Like, it's really, really challenging to be talking about race all the time, but particularly in this environment. And so it's, this calling is requiring things of me that are new and different. And quite frankly, I think it's requiring things that weren't even in me before that God is forging in me right now.
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day. I was reading an article about a brand that is trying to figure out, a P&G brand, one that you and I would know very well, trying to figure out how to talk to consumers today with all of the things going on. And I think the work that you're doing was kind of almost in some ways like a predecessor of some of the challenging issues that are going on today with gender issues and so many things. Help us understand how, I know it's a challenge, put a little meat on that bone for us. Like, what is the challenge? How is the world challenging you, and how are you learning to rely on the Lord in these? It's just, it feels so touchy. It is. You say the wrong thing and the next thing you know, you're canceled. And it's, how are you doing that? Like, how is he leading you through that? I say to my people all the time, I'm glad I'm not a CEO right now.
Oh man.
And you're living it.
Right.
So, and in a space where, man, there's people on both sides who just are touchy.
Yes.
Bob
Yes.
Goff and I had a conversation on the podcast about how do you, leading with hope in a world of cynicism.
Hmm.
I mean, and you're
Hmm.
trying, that's, anyway, I'm talking too much to get to, because I want to hear your answer. Like, how are you doing that? How you do it?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people out there who
Yeah.
are trying to navigate this in their own space.
Totally. 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 Um, First of all, let's go back to the title of this podcast. Only by faith.
Yeah.
Only by faith. I don't know how to do it. And that's the thing. I mean, I give a talk to leaders, and one of the things I say is I actually quote Charles Dickens in Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of
What's
times,
the
and I would
time?
say from 2020 until who knows when it'll end. But for sure, I think anybody living through these last 3 years would say it's been the best of times and the worst of times to be a
Yeah.
leader. And it's easy to see that only as a problem, but within that is an opportunity because I do believe that this moment belongs to trustworthy leaders.
Mm,
And I think that's what I'm realizing is an anchor is I want to be trustworthy. I want to be anchored enough in reality. I want to be anchored in a set of relationships. I want to be accountable to a set of people that helps me to show up as a trustworthy leader
yeah.
in this space. So, for most folks, who are leading right now, we go back to this quote. We actually have this in our book. There's a leader who is in a broader leadership role, and in 2020, we were helping him with this set of pastors think through how do pastors lead through this difficult, challenging thing on race. And he said, "Hey, if I were to summarize what I'm hearing from pastors right now in 2020, he said it's that they can't win,
Mm,
they can lose, and they can't quit. Like, that's how people feel.
yeah.
That's how CEOs feel. That's
Yes.
how nonprofit leaders feel. That's how everyday folks who are posting on social media feel, right? Like, oh my gosh, can I comment
Right.
on this? Can I not? What do I say? And
Right.
so I think the thing that I'm learning is a couple things. One is we are just so deeply polarized that
Hmm.
it is really hard for people to process reality through lenses other than their own.
Yeah.
It's just really hard. And I think I think the strongest tool to help us do that is we have to have relationships with people who are different from us.
Yeah.
We've got to move closer to, not further away from, people who have a lived experience or a perspective that are different from ours. And what I would hope
Yeah.
is that Undivided is a place where people get to cultivate those tools.
Right.
And hopefully those tools serve them. I know they serve them in the conversation on race. I would hope they serve them in other
Other
conversations as
places.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I was at a large organization, Amazon. I was at Amazon. I was doing a workshop with African American leaders at Amazon. And it was so powerful, and to be in a room where I felt like because of the unique way that Undivided talks about race,
Hmm.
we were able to bring a unique value to this group of leaders, high level leaders, um, because we were able to help them engage with their own personal stories at a heart level.
Hmm.
And from that, be more empowered to lead in organizations where oftentimes they are the minority, but also
Yeah.
lead others who are in these minority groups in these conversations. And so I think like that's the unique place that God has given me and our team to stand. But again, it goes back to how do we do that authentic,
Yeah.
anchored, showing up as our full selves so that we can be trustworthy, even if people disagree with me. I mean, I'm sure that if we were to get into details, there'd be some things people would disagree with me on, but I hope that at
Right.
the end of that disagreement, what they would see is, but this is a guy who's trying to live consistent to the set of values that guide his life in every other area. And
Yeah.
I'm bringing that to this conversation as well.
Yeah.
That's my
I
hope.
I really love that point. And one of the big takeaways from what you just said for me is this idea of anchored in relationships. One of the,
Yes.
I think an observation I've made over my career and in my own life is we think we're really good at knowing what somebody else thinks. And there's actually a lot of data.
That's great.
And really what we're doing, Chuck, is we're reading each other's minds. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Mm.
data about how inaccurate we actually are. Even the best of us who would tell you, hey, I listened to Brene Brown. I'm really good at empathy.
Right.
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 But the
Mm-hmm.
reality
Mm-hmm.
is I can't read your mind, and I can do
No.
it even less well if you are different than I am. which
That's right.
everybody's different from each other, but there
That's
are
right.
more
Yeah.
significant differences in some cases. So this
Hmm.
idea of staying
Hmm.
anchored in relationships is good because it keeps us from, I don't have to read your mind if I have a relationship with you. We can have a conversation
That's
and
right.
you can tell me what you're
That's
thinking.
right.
And
That's
I
right.
love that point you made earlier with your now co-founder, that as
Hmm.
he revealed more of his heart, you revealed more of your
That's
heart,
right.
and how
That's right.
beautiful that is when that works. I've
Hmm.
also been reflecting a lot about, and I want to ask you, this is related to how you actually do this on a day-to-day basis. I feel like I know for myself, staying connected to the Lord is,
Yeah.
it's like my lifeline, and
Hmm.
my recognition of my need for it has grown as
Yeah.
circumstances in the world have changed.
Hmm.
I know from what I know of you that you are deeply rooted and you abide in the Lord, but give us some practical, tell us, how do you stay connected to God? What are
Yeah.
the practices you use that other leaders maybe could try to reapply?
Man, that's good. Yes. And you're right. And again, I think it's so important to just recognize. And, I'm sure, well, I know that if you plopped me in 1917 when the influenza pandemic was happening, if you plopped me in 1917 with all that I know about 2023, I would come back and say, y'all, we don't have it bad at all. Like we're
Right.
you know, plop, plop me as a black man in 1817, and I would say, y'all, for sure, we don't have it bad at all, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
I understand it's relative, but I do think it's important to say within our lifetime, within your listener's lifetime, anybody listening right now, within your lifetime, I think this is the most complex reality we've ever had to live with.
Totally.
And
Totally.
I think it's okay. And I think it's helpful to start from there because
Yeah.
that means you shouldn't have it figured out. And oh, by the way, nobody has it figured out, which hopefully helps you give yourself grace and other people grace. So I just want to
That's
plus
so
one
good.
that because
Such
I
a
think that's
good,
really important what you said. I think it's like don't go by that. That's really helpful for
yeah.
listeners right now. And hopefully why a podcast like yours is one that people want to continue to engage because where do you find the voices of people who are helping you to navigate that? And you're one
Right.
of those voices. And so I think that's really
Yeah.
important. Um, for me, what that has meant in terms of staying connected to God, it's really required more intentionality around a couple things.
Okay.
It's for it's required more margin
Yeah.
in my life, and I work a lot of hours, just like a lot of people work a lot of hours. So I know when I say more margin, everybody's like, "And where is that supposed to
Where's
come
that
from?"
come
I get
from?
it.
Yeah.
I get it. Um, but what it's required for me is I have to have once a quarter, at least a day,
Mm,
where I am able to have silence and solitude.
yeah.
I need it.
Yeah.
Um, and here's how I know we're in a difficult spot. I've had that rhythm for quite some time.
Hmm.
And in the past, I needed maybe an hour or two to kind of wash out whatever was going on and kind of
Yeah.
be able to focus. And the rest of the day was with God. I feel like I need 6 hours now to just wash out.
Just,
I'm lucky
yeah.
if I get like one new thing. I just need to stop. And
Yeah.
I think as I've done it, and some days I've come to it like, all right, God, well, I'm hoping you speak to me about this, and I got this coming up, and I feel like there's been these times where God is like, you think you need more input?
Yeah. Who's running this
You
meeting
don't
anyway?
you don't need any more input. Just slow down and be with me.
Totally.
So I would say that's number one
Yeah.
and I think leaders can do that. Like maybe it's not a full day, maybe it's a half a day, maybe it's half of a Sunday, maybe it's not even something that happens during the week. I would just encourage, like, we need time to pull away. We see this in Jesus's life. And I love that the Bible it does not say Jesus Monday through Saturday.
Right.
No, it doesn't. It just says he did it regularly, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure he had a regular connection with the Father that may have looked like something he did daily, but and there's some stories of that in the Bible, but that's not the like it has to be this way. But clearly there are times in his life where Jesus said, "This requires me to pull away for an extended period of time."
Yep.
It's a transition. It's a moment where I need discernment. I think he pulled away to grieve after the
Yeah.
death of John the Baptist, as I read in the
Yeah.
scriptures. I think he pulled away because his cousin died, right? And he
Yeah.
just needed some time.
Yeah.
So I think that's number one. Number two for me, and again, I think every leader can do this. It's required. me staying connected to Jesus has required new relationships.
Mm.
So I now have a spiritual director, and that's not something that I had before.
Yeah.
And she's amazing. She is a wise, wise woman. And she's really kind of become like a spiritual mother to me in a time where I need that.
Yeah.
And I have a mentor that I've had for years. And so those relationships and having trusted people, that's been another big part of it for me. And then I think the third thing is like, then you gotta have, and I feel like I've had to navigate this differently. Who are you in the trenches with every day?
Yeah.
Right? It's great to have mentors. It's great to have relationship with Jesus and silence and solitude. But who are the people you're in the trenches with? People
Yeah.
who have similar, either they're at the same level of career as you, and or they can understand your stage of life. You know, maybe
Yeah.
you're a new parent, maybe you're single and they're single, whatever it is, that group of people who are in the trenches. So maybe it might sound like an untraditional way to answer that question. I mean, yes, read your Bible, pray daily. Yes,
Yeah.
walk with the Holy Spirit. I'm not saying any of that stuff isn't important, but as I think about what are the unique things in this season that I am finding God leading me to, it's really around margin for extended time of retreat.
Yeah.
It's about these new relationships with people who can really give you specific spiritual guidance. And it's about having some people who are in the trenches with me, who know my life, they know my good and my bad, and they're walking with me in this season of my life.
That's so good. That's so good. One piece I want to build on that you shared, this concept of taking a day a quarter. When I was running the garage group, I would take a day a month. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was almost, there were times when I could have been okay with a day a quarter. There were times when I could have been okay with a half a day. And I think the key is what you said. How long does it take you to empty yourself so that he can fill you? Because to me, that's the point of those days away was, hey, I need you to fill me up because I need to lead from a place of being filled. And you can't fill me up if I have filled myself up.
That's
With
right.
my own
That's
thoughts,
right.
my own agenda. Here's my list, God. Let's go through my list and reminding myself. Kathy Beecham always used to tell me every morning she'd ask she'd go through her dance card, which was her set of meetings, and she'd say, you know, let's talk about these and remind herself that he's leading the dance.
That's right.
That's
right. I remember that.
And you know, I mean, she taught me all kinds of things. I know she taught you all kinds of things too, but
Indeed,
that reminder that like he's in charge. And for me, it's almost like I have trouble letting him be in charge until I dump some stuff out. And that regular practice for me had to come a little bit more
regularly.
often. And so I think as leaders, or even if you're not a leader, if you're an employee, if you're a mom, frankly, if you're a mom, you're leading the most important thing in the world. But
you are.
But to step back and say, how do I need to empty myself so that you can fill me? If you ever want to know really how to do this beautifully, go watch Heidi Baker on YouTube. I've seen her live a couple of times do that. That woman knows how to empty herself.
Wow.
In a more beautiful way than I've ever seen anybody do it. And it really has impacted me. I went on a trip to Brazil and she was there, and it was just so inspiring to learn that from her. So good. But I loved what you said. I love that it's not just about reading your Bible every day and taking in half an hour to pray in the morning and do a devotional. And those are great. But
do those. Absolutely. You should be doing those. Those should be the basics.
Yeah. But
and you do have to ask that question. There's other stuff, and this moment requires more. I mean, I almost hesitate to say it that way because I don't want people to hear in that religious performance. I don't want people to hear in that a to-do list from God. That's not the point. Maybe I should say it this way. In this moment, God is offering more. Maybe that's the better way to say it. He's offering more in this moment for us to receive, and we need what he's offering.
We do.
I need what he's offering.
I sure do too. I do too. All right, I'm going to shift gears for a second because I saw a thing recently on social media that your son won the sportsmanship award.
Oh,
and
I
thought, man, that's a cool thing. And like, as a leader, you know, you have all the times I've known you, for the years I've known you, you've done such a good job of remembering that your role as a dad is eternally, not that your role as a CEO isn't eternally important, but there's nobody else that can be his dad.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Tell me a little bit about how it felt and what went through your mind and what the Lord said to you about him winning an award like that in particular.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me any opportunity to brag on my beautiful family and my kids. So I'll take it. I'll take it. Yeah, it was really cool. So my son commenced, whatever you want to call it, from 8th grade. He's going to be in high school next year. And they give out 2 awards for sportsmanship. Archie Griffin Award, who's, for anybody listening in the Ohio area, will know that name, one of the greatest athletes come out of Ohio State.
Yep.
And the thing that I loved about the award is that it's based on sportsmanship. So it's based on character on and off the field. And to hear the athletic director describe, because first they describe the kid and then they reveal the name, you don't know
who it is.
They tell you ahead of time, oh, Nathan's going to win this award. Man, when they called his name, Mom cried immediately. I was a delayed reaction, and I started to tear up. And it's I think for me, so here's how I was reflecting on it. I've told my kids this all the time, and I really mean this. God has gifted me with 3 amazing kids. Mm-hmm. They are intelligent, they are creative, they are all kinds of things. They're athletic, obviously, wonderful. But I've told my kids from day one, the things that I get more excited about, I don't care how good you are athletically, I'll be excited about that, of course. And I want you to do well in school, but I care about your character more than anything. And I am going to cheer for your character development, even when you lose the game or get the C. That's what's most important. And yesterday was an opportunity for me to illustrate that and reinforce that to not just my son, but to my other kids. This is about character. And that's what me and Mom care about even more. And I think the thing that it's funny, I'll try not to tear up just thinking about this. What God constantly shows me in that. I keep going back to this verse in the Bible where Jesus says, if even though you hate your kids, wouldn't give them a stone. And he doesn't mean hate like you hate your kids. Right. He's saying if you don't love your kids as much as God loves you. That's basically what he's saying. Even you will give your kids good gifts. How much more? And I love that phrase. How much more will the Father give you? In this case, Jesus was saying, give you the gift of the Holy Spirit. But I just think about the how much more. So when I have moments like yesterday, where I just am I couldn't be more proud of this kid, right? I'm beaming. How much more does our Heavenly Father beam over us? How much more does he delight in the character that's being forged in us, even through really hard things? How much more does he delight when he gives us good gifts and we are hey, we're enjoying the gift? How much more? So that was a moment yesterday to have a how much more moment of I know how I feel right now. I am over the moon. I'm good. I'm good. Yesterday was a really good day, right? How much more? And that's just really sweet for me to go back to. I am convinced that, first of all, if raising kids didn't have some joy and pleasure, no one would do it.
Right.
And so there has to be some joy and pleasure in it. And I am convinced God's vision for that is way less about the enjoyment you get from your kids, and it's more about the image your kids show you of how he sees you. That's the beautiful gift of being a parent. It is.
So beautifully said. So beautifully said. And the thing I was also thinking about as you were talking was, the excitement you have about your son's character is way outweighs the award itself. Right.
Totally.
And the things you care about and the things that you celebrate in him, I think we forget real quickly as we get older that that's how the Father sees us. Yeah. Good for you. You made the Inc. 500 fastest growing company list. Right. But what I'm really celebrating is your character, and what I'm really grieving are flaws in your character or things where you're not growing towards me or you're separating from me. And he just wants our character to grow, just like you as a father look at your kids and that's the most important thing to you. How often you lose sight of for him looking down on us, what are the things that he's most excited about? It's not our title and it's not our paycheck it's not the who's who list. And it's about our hearts and our character. So what a beautiful picture of that Thank you for sharing that.
Well,
All
thanks for
right.
the opportunity.
Excuse me. Who else should we have on this podcast? This is a podcast about faith-driven. Who do you want to hear from?
Yes, man. How many names do you want? I can give you a couple.
Many as you want to give us.
Teresa Tanner. You should be connecting with Teresa Tanner. You should.
I know Teresa.
She is incredible as a faith-driven leader. This might sound self-serving, and it's not meant to be self-serving. Courtney Walton, who is on our team at Undivided, is actually getting a doctorate in race-based trauma and its impact on Black women in the marketplace.
Really? That's fascinating.
And is a deeply spiritual woman. And I think she would be an amazing guest to have on your podcast. Alvin Sanders. I don't know if you know Alvin, but Alvin leads World Impact, which is one of the large. I mean, they equip so many. They're basically a seminary for urban ministry, and he's in Cincinnati, but the impact it's World Impact. I mean, they do this work all over the country for sure, and I think all over the world. He'd be a great guest to have on your podcast as well. And then Kyle Ranson.
Yeah.
I know you know Kyle. Kyle is such a gifted creative, and I think can really speak to kind of the creative. I mean, he does it in a church context, but he is so connected to creative, to tech, to where, he was leading online church. And so just where is the future of technology going? He'd be a great one. So like I said, I can give you 5 more names, but those are some that come to mind immediately.
Those are awesome. And we may follow up and get some more names.
Yes.
Chuck, this has been such a joy. And I knew I would learn some things from you. I did. I have all kinds of notes. I could probably ask you about 25 or 30 more questions, but maybe we'll set up another podcast episode with you someday, because you have a lot of wisdom, and you have a way of being able to translate what you've learned into something powerful and memorable. And I've always known that about your teaching. And I'm just so excited about what you're doing with Undivided. And how can we stay connected to Undivided? How can listeners find out what's going on?
Indeed. So easiest way is undivided.us. Undivided.us is the website. And then I'm on all the social channels, as is Undivided. So you can look for me at Chuck Mingo on Instagram and Twitter, which is where I'm at Chuck D Mingo on Facebook as well. So yes.
Okay, excellent. We'll put all those links in the show notes.
Perfect.
So for those of you that want to follow up, you can just check out the show notes, and that way you can get a hold of Chuck. Chuck, thank you again so much. This has been such a blast.
Thank you. And same thing. This is a conversation that we wanted to have for a long time, and it's been fun to have it.
I'm glad we finally had it. Good stuff. What a treat that conversation was with Chuck Mingo. I am continuously, today being no exception, impacted by Chuck's wisdom and his clarity about what he's learning. So I was thinking about a couple key takeaways. I love the conversation with Chuck about, as we live our values, we live into the fullness of who we are. And as I reflected on that, I was thinking about one of my values. One of my values is rest, which might sound like a little bit of a foreign concept to many of us. And I'll confess, it was a foreign concept to me for a lot of years. But when I started to really slow down and learn how to rest, it started to change me and kind of became a value when I started to practice. And now it stays a value because I continue to practice it. But it changed when I rest well. It changes who I am. It changes how I live my life. I feel more alive. I feel clearer. I feel more authentic. I have better relationships. And overall, I'm just more at peace. I trust the Lord more. And I would say I have true joy. But I have to continuously not just say that I value rest, but I actually have to practice it. So I have to incorporate it into my days and into my weeks. I have to live it out. So I'm curious, what are some of your values, and are you consistently living in them so that you can live in the fullness of who you are? Second big takeaway for me, Chuck talked about his career journey and numerous times where he recognized that God was inviting him in to consider a trade-off. And he talked about the reality that we are always putting our trust in something or someone. We might be trusting in our salary. We might be trusting in our title. We might be trusting in the praise and affirmation of other people, our team or our board or our clients, customers. We might be trusting in our achievements. But so often the Lord invites us to trade those things instead for trust in Him. And oftentimes when we make a career transition, that's kind of what we're doing. We're trusting that He's going to bring us into more fullness of who we are, to go back to what we talked about earlier. And that's a beautiful thing. Third piece that I was deeply impacted by, because Chuck is leading in a particular area right now that is wrought with tension. And we talked about this idea of leading in this moment. And he said that some of the research he's seen says that people would say they feel, and many of you might feel this way, we feel we can't win, we certainly can lose, and we can't quit. And that might feel like a really hopeless place to be, but the conversation with Chuck offered such a beautiful hope that even while we're still rooted in this reality, the recognition that God knows what's going on, and He actually has more for us in this season where it feels like we need more. We recognize our need more. We need more of Him to lead well, and He's offering us more so that we can lead well. What do you need from the Lord? Like, how might you be able to? And then the second piece is, we had this conversation with Chuck. Part of the conversation was this piece about getting quiet enough and emptying our own thoughts enough for Him to give us what we need. And there's an interesting relationship here between rest and margin and getting what we need in this moment. So circling it all back, my encouragement today, my takeaway question for you is, what needs to be true for you to create the margin so that you can empty yourself enough that the Lord can fill you up with what you need to lead right now? If you are loving the Faith Driven Leader podcast, we'd love your help. We'd love you to share the podcast, to rate the podcast, and to subscribe to the podcast. If you could do any or all of those things, that would really help us out so that more folks like you can be equipped and emboldened to bring their faith into their work. One last time, thank you so much to my good dear friend, Chuck Mingo, for joining us. I will see you all next time on The Faith Driven Leader.